Hi, I'm James Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. The flow of migrants to Europe this year is being described as the largest in modern history from outside the European continent. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are fleeing war, poverty, and persecution. Some experts warn that the mass migration could continue or even increase in years to come. To discuss the latest developments in this crisis and how it affects Europe, but how it affects the United States as well, I want to welcome Lavinia Limon. She's President and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, formerly served as Director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, worked on behalf of refugees and immigrants for over 30 years. Thanks for joining us, Lavinia.
Thank you.
There was a quote in the New York Times that I want to put up and take a look at. It was an article that was on Sunday in the Times front page story, and here's what it said. It said, there are more displaced people and refugees now than any other time in recorded history, 60 million in all, and they're on the march in numbers not seen since World War II. They're coming not just from Syria, but from an array of countries and regions, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Gaza, and even Haiti, as well as any of a dozen or so nations in sub-Saharan and North Africa. They are unofficial ambassadors of failed states, unending wars, and intractable conflicts. The most striking thing about the current migration crisis, however, is how much bigger it could still get. Why? I mean, we've had these wars and crises all along, but the numbers have just become amazing. 60 million people displaced, about 20 million of them actual refugees out of their countries. Is it a confluence of events just by happenstance, or are there particular drivers here?
I think it's a set of circumstances. Obviously, war. People flee for their lives, and that's what we're seeing out of Syria. We're seeing out of Iraq the same situation. In Afghanistan, yes, it's more of a low-level war, but people often don't see a future or an end to it. And I think that's what you're seeing in people going to Europe. They don't have hope that things will get better, that the war will end and they'll be able to go home. They see an unending stretch in a refugee camp or in poverty in Amman or in Istanbul or some small city around the
What struck me is the line in the article that said it can get worse, and I looked at that, and there are about 4 million, just look Syria alone, 4 million refugees, but about 12 million internally displaced people. If the war continues to grow and spread into the areas where people are internally displaced, they're going to leave. The numbers could get worse, and I saw a comment by, I think it was Marco Rubio, or Jeb Bush. It was Jeb Bush the other day who said that if President Obama had started bombing Syria sooner, we wouldn't have these refugees, but the actual response to that was that we might have had more.
Absolutely.
We might have had more. So it can get worse.
Right.
Do we have any estimates of where we're going, or are we all in the dark on this?
I think we're pretty much in the dark because we don't know what's going to happen inside Syria. Clearly there's move to try and gain some sort of equilibrium back, but I don't have a lot of hope for that. I don't think the refugees have a lot of hope for that.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been going on now almost 5 years. You know, I've been out to Jordan before they built a camp and met with Syrians there. And the world ignored it and ignored it. And Jordan bore the burden, Turkey bore the burden, Lebanon, 1 in 4 people, Syrian refugees. And finally something's got to give. And these people decided, let's try and get to Italy, let's try and get to Greece.
It appears to me that focus was given to this issue only when we started to read the stories about the ships in the Mediterranean and when this land bridge was discovered and people started going over across Turkey and up into Europe. It's almost as if as long as they were in camps in Lebanon and Jordan and dying in the camps, it was okay. But when they started coming to Europe and disturbing Europe, then all of a sudden it became a crisis. And there was that horrific picture that we woke up to of little Elan Kurdi.
Right.
It took that to bring it to our consciousness.
On your doorstep. right? In Greece, next to the, beach resorts. Wait a minute, that's not supposed to be. The fact that, again, countries in the Middle East have been living with this for years just kind of washed over everybody. People have been dying in the Mediterranean for years, coming from Libya and Egypt and other places trying to get to Europe. And, there was concern about that and a lot of conversation about smugglers, and somehow, smugglers became the bad guys. And they're not good guys. I don't mean to say they're good guys. They're guys making a buck, right? And sometimes they kill people deliberately. These are not good people. But when you are desperate and the only help you can get is from a bad guy, or you have to pay a great deal of money, you will do that.
Let's look at we have a board here that describes a map of where people are going, and the routes are there. I mean, you can see the sea route, you can see the land route. It was in the New York Times on Sunday. Can we put that up here? And you get a good visual sense of people using that land bridge across Turkey, but then also all of the African and some of the East African coming up through Libya. These are not Libyans. These are people who found that as the closest point to Europe. And then the northern route there describes some folks coming from Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainian refugees, not a whole lot of focus on that. Over almost 2 million, I think, Ukrainians. And so those are the countries that are actually being affected, are the European countries where they're going. It's no longer a refugee issue. I would want to talk about the situation in the camps and the fact that the UN High Commission is kind of out of money and being cut back. But partly because of that, this refugee issue has become now a migration issue. Right. And Europe is having to deal with it in a way that they're not prepared for, not just financially, but culturally. These are small little ethnically simplistic countries of one ethnic group here, there. They don't mix with each other. And now they're having to deal with a whole different culture. Right. They're seeing it as a temporary problem, but it's not. Not at all.
Not at all. I find this flow, this migrant crisis, yes, is largely refugees by the international definition, people fleeing war and persecution. But there are immigrants, people who want a better life, in that flow. So, in the business, we call it a mixed flow. So by the laws, by the rules, Europe is supposed to be able to figure it out. These are refugees, and they have certain obligations to provide protection. These are migrants, immigrants. You can send them home if you wish, according to your own individual country's decisions. But this sort of phenomena, which I think probably could have been predicted, is, yes, a culmination of war and lots of other things, but it's also globalization. Everyone has a smartphone. Everybody knows somebody who lives someplace. This world is a place where information flows in an instant, money flies around the globe, goods go around the globe, and somehow we think everybody's going to stay put. No, they're not. So what are we going to do about that? How do we cope with that? And how do we cope with it and keep our humanity? And I think that's the challenge.
Germany is willing to accept hundreds of thousands. Some suggest because Germany's population is declining and they're making a smart move. Some other countries have sealed their borders. Hungary, Poland is turning to the right. There's the fear that Islamophobia will trump compassion and spawn or actually increase the popularity of some of the right-wing xenophobic political parties. That's a real danger.
It really is. It's if you can imagine this crisis if everyone was Christian, it would still be a crisis, but it wouldn't have that certain flavor to it. And that foreignness of other people. As you said, Europe is an enclave of little cultures and nation states that somehow see themselves very different. When I was young, my father used to say, well, just be happy Europe's not at war with itself. And I thought he was crazy because, I'm World War II. And, but I've realized what he meant by that. And now we have these situations where, as you said, Hungary's closing its borders. Germany's saying, okay. The UK is going, wait, 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 wait. Sweden's saying, we have enough. And they're losing their ability to sit down together and come up with a policy that's rational.
Mm-hmm. They have 800,000 in the continent now,
Right.
all spread out all over. The numbers, the estimates are that will probably double at least in the next 5 years, and maybe even more. A bit of it reminds me of the situation here in the States with the undocumented, and the situation we had a year ago with the children coming up from Central America, again fleeing persecution and seeking a better life. We didn't deal with it very well here. And I met with a group of Eastern Europeans the other day, and they were talking about it, and I said, you're not going to, a Donald Trump solution, you laugh at Donald Trump here, but that's not going to work in Europe either.
Right.
These folks are not going anywhere. Can Europe deal with it at the end of the day?
Right. And we see, I'm very afraid of the lack of leadership anywhere. This administration, as you said, did not handle last year's crisis at the border, a bunch of women and children fleeing persecution and violence. They didn't handle that well at all. They did not, in my opinion, give these children what they deserved as children and as human beings. And so we don't have a lot of moral authority on this issue. But you also see, it's like, oh, that's Europe's problem, leave it to them. But I really think we have got, I would love to see this administration pull everybody together and say, all right, let's work it out. Because, again, we risk so much in handling this badly, aside from the bodies washing up on the shores. I mean, we have to think about, what are we going to say when we look in the mirror 10 years from now? What were we doing when this crisis happened? How did we behave? Do we still have any values?
The President said he would increase the numbers by 5,000 a year over the next several years. We already do 70,000, spread out all over the world. Critics have said two things. We've got letters from Republican members of Congress saying, don't you dare.
Right.
These are a danger to the security of the country. And you've got letters from Senator Durbin and 14 other of his colleagues saying, increase to 65,000, period, for Syrians. Martin O'Malley the other day calling for 100,000 Syrians to be let into the country. And you were just up in Michigan. The state wants as many as 50,000.
That's right.
Baltimore wants them.
Cleveland
Detroit
wants them.
Right. I mean, cities that are dying know that these people can bring new life.
That's right.
What's going to ultimately win out here? I mean, the pressure against the president doing it is great, but there's a lot of pressure for it. I mean, how do we look at the balance on that?
It's really very sad, because refugees has always been a bipartisan issue. I mean, a big champion of refugees was Ronald Reagan. You know which president in the modern time brought the most refugees per year? Was George Bush the first. He brought the most refugees of anyone. And yet we see now this has become a bipartisan issue with Trump saying, I'll send them home. Again, we risk so much by not having a national policy. We are a country of refugees. The Pilgrims were refugees. We've opened our doors to so many refugees. They've contributed in so many ways. And as you said, there are areas of this country who really want to have refugees. And there are areas where I'm quite afraid that if we sent a family, they'd be tarred and feathered and run out of town, because there's this small group of people that are really fueling this Islamophobia, and it's all geared towards Syrians. Our office has been getting calls. Other resettlement offices have gotten calls. Don't you dare bring any Syrians to our community. Again, it's back to political leadership.
Let's look at the numbers again, just to see where they're coming from. We've got a board here of them. It's Syrians are the biggest, and Afghanis and Somalis and Sudanese. So in other words, Muslims are the largest component group. We have some success stories. I mean, your organization has dealt with refugee resettlement. Iraqis, they're on the list, a major group, not as big today as it was back then. But Iraqis and Bosnians have made huge contributions in just the last 2 decades.
That's right.
is there a way to project that lesson forward to people to say, don't worry about this, we have the screening process in place, but look at what they bring?
Right.
Or are we going to lose out to fear?
Well, I certainly hope it's not the latter. We screen, the government has the most rigorous security screening about refugees than any other people who come to this country. If you're a bad guy, you do not want to come here as a refugee. Come as a tourist. Come as a businessman. Come as a student, because you will not undergo that kind of rigorous screening. It takes on average over 3 years, which I think is insane and is another topic, to process a refugee to the United States. The folks that have come in, you want to see what the Bosnians have done? Go to Utica, New York. They've completely redone the city.
It's my hometown.
Is it?
They took my mom's house, rebuilt it.
That's
And
right.
neighborhoods that I thought would never come back have now been restored.
That's right.
With new businesses and
That's
new
right.
life.
That's right. And the Iraqis have done marvelous things in Lemon Grove, California, just east of San Diego, and contributed in so many ways. And that's just the beginning. I mean, their kids are now, starting to go to college, and they'll contribute. So that's the history of this country. It's in our DNA. We, I think, cannot turn our backs on it.
UNHRC has 20,000 people that they have pre-processed and sent to us for consideration. I think we've done about 12 to 1,400. That's in the last 5 years, Syrians. It takes 3 years. It's an abominably slow process. Talk to me a bit about what the High Commission does before they, of the 20,000, who are these people? Do they pre-screen? Do they have their own process where they're saying, we know the U.S. is kind of picky, so we're going to help out here a little bit? And then why is the process so slow, and what can be done to fix it?
Okay, UNHCR interviews people to make sure they meet the definition of a refugee, because they are going to give them an ID card that says, we think you're a refugee. Yes, the countries that do resettlement submit their criteria to the UNHCR. The U.S. criteria is most vulnerable. You can define that as people being sick, female-headed households, various ways that you can define that. And so the UNHCR does that kind of filtering and then presents to the United States the 20,000 in this case. The US then has to interview them again, doing a screening, then having them come out, the immigration officers come out and interview them face to face. They have to go through a health screening, they have to go through the security screening. Now, it used to be that you could do all that in about 3 months. And even if you add the expanse of security, it really shouldn't take that long. It's gotten incredibly bureaucratic, and frankly, no one has a sense of urgency. It's as if it doesn't matter that people are waiting 3 years. And here we have a program that's supposed to be rescuing people.
Somebody told me that it goes sequentially. They do one, then another, and another. And I thought about it. If you had a blood test that way,
That's right.
and got your results, first you get this one, your blood sugar one, and then you went back and you got your cholesterol one, and then you went back. It would take you about 3 years to get a physical.
Exactly. And that's
Can
how
it
they
be
do
done simultaneous?
Yes.
What's needed? More resources?
More resources and leadership and a sense of urgency. You know the way that our government works. If the president said, I want to have 100,000 Syrians in this country, and if they don't get in, your heads will roll, people will find a way.
Does he have the ability to do that, or will Republicans block it? I mean, is this something he can do administratively in his last year?
Legally,
Yeah.
he can do it, but there wouldn't be funds to support them.
Okay.
So Congress holds the purse.
What about family ties? I know a lot of folks who have family who want to bring them. Is the process the same, or is there a different process that would make it easier for people with family ties to come?
It's different and more difficult.
Oh.
You have to have DNA testing. About 4 or 5 years ago, they put in a new process because they found that there was fraudulent family reunion. And to date, we've had, after 4 or 5 years, like less than 300 people get here on family reunion. You know, the bringing in refugees has always had 3 elements to it. One is the foreign policy element. It's a tool of foreign policy, right? If you take a group of refugees because you have concern and you're also making a statement. Then there's the domestic policy. There's a group here, remember the 80s and Ronald Reagan? The Jewish community here said the Soviet Jews are being persecuted, and they put it in place, and we brought tens of thousands of Soviet Jews. So it's a domestic concern. And then thirdly, it's a humanitarian concern, and usually in that order. The fact that they can't process someone in less than 3 years has taken it away from any administration as a foreign policy tool, has completely negated the family reunion business, and we're down to humanitarian, and I don't think 3 years is humanitarian.
You talked about Utica. You mentioned other communities. I saw, I think it was last week or the week before, some little county in South Carolina passing a resolution on the county level saying no Syrians in our county. They don't have any Syrians, and nobody really is looking to send anybody there. How do the selections get made when these resettlement centers begin? I mean, when my family came, there had been some Lebanese settlers in that community, and it was like an avalanche. You know, one rock lands and they all pile up behind. And so they went there because they knew about it. But is there a selection made about what counties or what cities? I mean, I saw the letter from the 18 mayors, New York, as you noted, New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. And I mean, not little burgs,
Right.
but then some of the little cities that want them too. And the middle-sized cities, Baltimore wants them, Cleveland wants them, Toledo wants them. Who makes the selection? How does it get made? And can cities actually become lobbyists for more immigrants and refugees because they want them?
It's a little complicated. There are 9 national resettlement agencies. My agency is one of them. We all have different networks. Most of the agencies are religiously based. The U.S. Catholic Conference on Bishops, Church World Service, which is mainline Protestant, World Relief, which is evangelical, Lutheran and Immigration Refugee Services. As I said, my agency and the International Rescue Committee, and we all have different networks. My agency, resettles through about 32 agencies. Every year, we have to do a proposal to the State Department, say, we propose to resettle 380 people in Cleveland. And we have to do reams of paper explaining why Cleveland's a good place to put 380 people. And then the State Department usually comes back and says, all right, but you can only settle 320.
Is
And I'm
Cleveland
like,
consulted first?
Yes.
Okay.
We talked to the mayor, the schools, the health people,
Right.
everything else. But I'm like, what makes you think that 60 people makes a difference in Cleveland?
Yeah.
But it's so tightly bureaucratized and controlled. That's what we have. So right now we're in conversation because we've had cities approaching us. We want more Syrians. So we're in conversations with them. Okay, we'll propose this to the Department of State, but we don't know whether they're going to say okay, no matter how much you want them.
I'm trying to get a handle on how this issue can move forward. It doesn't look promising.
Right.
With blockage from Congress, with the administrative problems that you describe at the federal level, and with a lack of leadership. As much as I like the president, and I'm a fan, he has not been as forceful on this issue, has he?
Not what I would like to see.
Yeah. And I'm not looking at anything coming forward as we move into the presidential cycle.
Right.
The Republicans are horrible, and Democrats haven't shown, with the exception of Martin O'Malley, who's been quite forceful, but he's also at 3-4% in the national polls.
I mean, I think, Donald Trump and others would like this to be a major issue in the campaign. I think Hillary and other folks would not like it to be a major issue. But we have been forced into this situation. And I agree with you. I mean, the Obama administration, I think, by its nature, would be very generous. But they obviously have to pick their battles. And this may not be a battle that they want to take on with the Congress.
One, as we close, give me a success story and a heartbreaker. Do the heartbreaker first.
Oh, the heartbreakers. I got a call the other day from a woman in Florida, Syrian American. Her son and his wife and their 5 children are in Jordan. She's sending money. He's been standing in line every morning trying to get registered with the UNHCR. She wants him to come. I'm sitting there saying, look, he's got to get registered. I'm giving her all the bureaucratic stuff. And she says, well, his youngest son is a U.S. citizen. He was born here. Does that count? And I'm like, I don't think so. Let me find out. And I found out, no, it doesn't matter. I mean, he can put his youngest son on a plane alone because he has an American passport, but it doesn't get you past those lines in the morning in Amman, right?
Give me a success story.
I would say Dearborn.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about, Middle Eastern people coming to this country and making something, I think Detroit and Dearborn is so fascinating because you drive from downtown Detroit and, it's getting better, but boy, was it so bad for so many years. And then you go to Dearborn, and every time I go, there's more businesses, there's more economy. More kids in school and graduating.
And it was Lebanese refugees, Iraqi refugees,
That's
and
right.
Yemeni refugees that built the place. And it's
That's
really
right.
exciting.
And a little girl who, I shouldn't say that, a young woman now, who was a little girl when I was in Saudi Arabia in 1992 interviewing refugees, and she was one of 5 kids in a big family. She's a lawyer. She's working for the state. She's doing fabulous things.
That's all the time we've got. Thanks, Livonia.
Thank you.
For more information, follow us on Twitter at aaiusa.org. Check out Livonia Limon and her work. It's fascinating. And follow us on our website, aaiusa.org. And we'll see you next week on Viewpoint.